Well, there continues to be fallout after that brief exchange between the Prime Minister and China's President Xi Jinping, admonishing Trudeau in full view of the press for sharing details of a conversation the two had during the G20 in Indonesia.
Everything we discuss is then leaked to the paper. That's not appropriate.
Now, observers and those with more intimate knowledge say the exchange demonstrates how poor Canada-China relations are at this moment, and perhaps more troubling, the disdain with which Xi Jinping views Prime Minister Trudeau. For their thoughts on the matter, we're now joined by our strategist panel. Susan Smith is the principal of the Blue Sky Strategy Group. Tim Powers is the chairman of Summa Strategies, and Anne McGrath is the national director for the NDP. Hello to the three of you.
Hi, Michael.
Hello.
Susan, I'm going to get you to start us out. Given the scolding the Prime Minister got, was it actually smart for him to share the details of the conversation, or just ill-advised?
So there's a term that many Canadians will be familiar with, and many people who have democratic governments around the world. It's called readout. And that means that there's a reporting, a summary of what happened in conversations. And that's precisely what the Trudeau government did. As a transparent democratic country, he had a conversation with a leader, and he shared details of that conversation. I think it's perfectly within the realm and the expectations of Canadians for that kind of information to be shared. President Xi, on the other hand, does not come from a free and democratic country. He didn't do the readout first, so I think what you saw was petulance on the part of President Xi. I don't think Canadians should read into it overly. If anything, I think if they care at all, I think they'll care that the Prime Minister did what's right, what's very Canadian. He was polite in the face of President Xi's bad manners, and I think it's fine. We've lots of trading partners in the world, a minor blip in the grand scheme of things, so I'm not worried about it at all.
Tim, what's your take? Because, the Prime Minister was under pressure to address potentially illegal activities that China has been committing in this country. That includes these so-called Chinese police stations on Canadian soil, the allegations of the Chinese Communist Party interfering in elections here in Canada. All of that in the readout. What's your take on whether or not the Prime Minister should have shared the details?
I think this is so frigging overblown. And that may surprise you to hear that. Justin Trudeau and I have one thing in common. We both used to be bouncers at nightclubs. And he did his best bouncing then, Michael, by not being intimidated, by not being thrown off by Jinping. I mean, that is such a staged act of intimidation. What was he supposed to do? Grab the Chinese leader by the lapels and shake him and say, "You talk more nicely to me"? Trudeau has a lot to answer for, yes, when it relates to Canada's position with China and what happened with the two Michaels, what's actually going on now. But I tell you what, I thought he did fine with this the other day. It was clearly staged, and there's something to be said when one of the most powerful nations in the world feels it needs to come over and scold you. Maybe you are irritating them to a degree that's pleasing. So I think this is just so overblown. I think he handled it the right way, and short of shaking him by the lapels, I don't know what people expected him to do.
Oh, okay, you think it's overblown. But, Anne, I guess the question is whether the Prime Minister could have raised the issue with Xi without sharing details with the press. What do you make of the decision?
Well, first of all, there are a lot of really critical issues between China and Canada right now. I mean, my colleagues here have mentioned the two Michaels. I think that these reports about interference in elections are very concerning, and I think, we really need to find out what's going on there. And of course, there are discussions right now about how we trade, where we trade, with whom we trade, all of those kinds of things. So really, really critical issues there. I would agree that I think that this particular incident is overblown. I think that Susan and Tim are right that it is very common for there to be what's called a readout after a meeting. They're pretty unexciting, most of them. They're about less than half a page, and it just usually says the two leaders met and these are the things that they talked about and they agreed to continue talking. That's basically what a readout does. And so I don't see anything unusual or dramatic about the readout having been done. That is not leaking things to the press. It is a readout of a meeting. The incident between the two leaders at the event, I think, was caught caught on microphone and so forth. But I didn't think anything particularly dramatic happened at it, really. But I do think that Canada has a lot of work to do in terms of developing I believe, a more sophisticated relationship with China. And one thing that would help for sure would be, I think, if we had an ambassador.
Which has been named, but let's talk about though that part of the admonishment, I guess, that the Canadian press says wasn't translated, and that's the part that she apparently warns that if conversations were not respectful, then there could be unpredictable results. Now, the Trudeau government is expected to release a new Indo-Pacific strategy. Do you think that comment is a bit of a shot across the bow? And I guess picking up on your point earlier, Susan, does it even matter?
Yeah, no, look, President Xi was posturing. You can sure bet that he doesn't walk places where there are cameras present unless he completely wants to send a message to the folks back home. Like I said, I don't think Canadians are terribly fussed by and probably happy with how Prime Minister Trudeau handled it with President Xi. We are waiting for an Indo-Pacific strategy. We've been waiting a while. For one, we need one, but there's a reason we need one and we will have one, is because there are other democratic rules-based trading nations in the world. The biggest one is about to be India. And we as a country continue to be a trading nation. We've had signals from our Deputy Prime Minister, we've had signals from our Foreign Affairs Minister that our preference is to do business with countries who we can trust, who follow the rules-based order, and where we can grow successfully and grow our business with them, grow our trade with them, and grow our relationships with them. So I think it's a signal that there's a pivot coming. In terms of whether President Xi thinks things need to be polite, I would remind everybody, and it drives me crazy every time I see it, we frequently have Chinese ambassadors who are guests to Canada coming on national news or giving news conferences where they're exceptionally critical of the Canadian government on our home soil. So from a manners-based approach, I don't think the Canadians need any lessons from the Chinese. From a trade-based approach, I think it's only prudent that as a country, we are constantly refreshing our trade and our global relations perspective on a prudent basis that looks forward. And certainly a new Indo-Pacific strategy will be well-timed and definitely needed, and a signal of things to come.
Tim?
Look, there's so much said about the strategy. My bigger concern out of all of this, and it's not so much the Xi incident. As I said, I actually think the Prime Minister handled that as well as he could, apart from physically throttling him, which was never an option, Michael. But it is... where does this leave Canada and the lack of clear policy at the moment with our Five Eyes allies? Because I think there is a criticism there, and I think it's legitimate. The Prime Minister in his early days, before he became Prime Minister, as you know, spoke with a bit more fondness about China. He's not, in some quarters, being seen as aggressive with China. Maybe we are behind the scenes and we don't know. Our bigger concern ought to be with our allies and less the Chinese. Our key five ally, the Five Eyes. How are the Five Eyes viewing the Canadian relationship with China? Do they view us as being in the court of the Five Eyes, or still a little too much in terms of our uncertainty with the relationship with China? That's what I'm more concerned about, not about how China views us, but our allies. China is always going to do what is best for China first. That has been their history. We should not expect any departure from it. Canada should take a similar approach, but in concert with its allies. And
final word to you.
So she is obviously in a pretty strengthened position domestically coming out of the Congress, and in all likelihood is sort of feeling a little bit of wind in his sails, and took the opportunity to try and put the Prime Minister of Canada in his place, and I think it failed. As others have said here, I think that what we should be doing is focusing. We need to figure out what our relationship with China is. We need to be very strong on the issues of foreign interference, for sure. And we need to look at who are the other partners in the region that we can develop stronger relationships with, places like India, Japan, etc.
Okay, well, that is all the time that we actually have. But thank you to the three of you for joining us this week once again. Susan Smith, Tim Powers, and Anne McGrath. Good to see you three.
Nice to see you, Michael. Thank you.